Can Mexico rise to the occasion? Outrage and calls for justice after the disappearance and murder of student activists in the southern state of Guerrero. In a nation that's all too used to brutal rampages, the grisly discovery of 34 charred corpses in a mass grave seemed to confirm what survivors and gang members claim, that police in Iguala were in cahoots with local drug lords to quash protests for better teaching practices. This in a town where the chief of police and the mayor are first cousins. Both, by the way, have gone missing the last couple of days. We're going to see how an area that's halfway between the capital and Acapulco can still be run in what some describe as a semi-feudal manner. The country's president vowing that justice will be served. Enrique Peña Nieto already sending in the federales and stripping local authorities of the investigation. Will there be a genuine backlash against impunity, or will scratching the surface only open a can of worms? That is collusion in many instances between local authorities and drug lords. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the outrage over Mexico's mass graves. And with us to talk about it from Mexico City, reporter Joan Grillo, author of El Narco, Inside Mexico's Criminal Insurgency. Welcome to the show, sir. Welcome as well to Gaspar Estrada of the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po's Latin American Observatory. Thank you for being with us. He's a visiting professor here in Paris. John Ackerman, columnist and editor-in-chief of the Mexican Law Review, and from our international affairs desk, France 24's very own Eduardo Quay, the France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and on Twitter our hashtag F24debate. Their ages between 18 and 26, the disappearance and murder of those students at a progressive teachers' college 2 hours away from Iguala, sparking nationwide outrage on Tuesday, and there were big demonstrations in Mexico City and elsewhere around the country.
It's a series of atrocious crimes, a series of unacceptable crimes, which we all have to protest against. This protest shows that we are a society that is conscious of what this means.
I lost my nephew and I want justice. Given that they brutally killed him, we want justice. That's it.
Justice, that they be found alive, that impunity ends in Mexico. This is what we're demanding in Mexico. We want the culprits to pay what they need to pay.
Joan Grillo, we heard the anger there. What's the latest?
Well, they still haven't identified these bodies, which is causing a lot of grief and consternation of families. If you can imagine the kind of pain they're going through, knowing that their loved one, their son or their brother has gone missing. The bodies have been found, yet still some 6 days after the bodies are found, they haven't given an ID and compared these DNA results. So anger brewing now. I mean, these communities where, many different villages in the mountains, and these are people who have grown up from being the sons of peasant farmers mostly, to become teachers, to train to be teachers, so quite valuable members of the communities. Now, to have this loss across this area will produce a big reaction, a lot of anger, and I think we haven't seen all of that anger yet.
All right, let me turn to the rest of our panel. I'll start with you, Gaspar Estrada. Anger against who?
I think there's anger against the elected officials, because this is another massacre in the state of Guerrero, who is widely known not only in Mexico but in the entire world for its non-democratic way of resolving problems. The democratic transition in Mexico has passed by several struggles, and especially in the state of Guerrero, because there is a mix between former guerrilla groups that are still operating there. You have very important drug lords that actuate there, because there's Acapulco. It's a strategic port in order to transport the drugs first to Mexico City and then to the U.S. And you have also a political personnel that is very that is haven't been evaluating on last years, and even if there are elections and you can have different parties elected on those elections, the political personnel is still the same, and in a certain way, we can see that those authorities are not blamed for the crimes that are committed.
So we shouldn't pay attention, in other words, to the label. Like, I know the governor and the mayor are from the opposition left, but forget that. That's not important.
Yeah, that's not the point, because if you see the political patterns of those elected officials, they're all cousins or brothers, or they know each other for them very well for years. So I don't think that it has been a democratization of the state of Guerrero as a whole, because you have a fragmentation of the political representation, but I don't think that means that we have a real democratic state.
All right, that brings us back to the specifics of this case, John.
Let's take that analysis one step further. In 2012, December 1st, 2012, a group of governors arrived to take control of the federal executive. Enrique Peña Nieto, the president of Mexico, represents and forms part of the clan of local feudal lords.
Hang on, you say feudal lords. Explain.
The governors of Guerrero, of the state of Mexico, of Hidalgo, are the representatives of old authoritarian politics in Mexico. This is the consequence of the arrival of old authoritarian politics to the presidency. This never happened before with Felipe Calderón. Felipe Calderón turned the country into a bloodbath. 80,000 people died in 6 years. But we never had direct repression against youth activists in Mexico. This is a major change of the way in which violence is taking place, and this is the direct result of the reversion of democracy and the consolidation of authoritarianism in Mexico. Right, as Joan Grillo mentioned, it's very important, these kids who were killed are community leaders. They are the victorious children of peasants in Guerrero who carry on with a long tradition of defending their communities and bringing social education and consciousness raising in their communities. Never before have, at least in recent years, have they been targeted by police and agents of the state, in cahoots with the narcos. But this makes people in Mexico think about whether the cahoots, the relationship, a corrupt relationship between police, between state officials and narcos is only in little villages in Guerrero? No. The suspicion is that this is something much more global and much broader.
All right, a lot of reactions coming in. One from Jim on Facebook. Soldiers are being sent in because drug lords are hiring cops as hit squads. Again, it brings us back, Eduardo Quay, to the specifics. And the question everyone's asking is, why were these students who'd come to demonstrate for better teaching reforms, why were they murdered?
Frankly, that's an interesting question, and I really don't understand why, because that's right, these people were there to help the poor, to teach them, etc. And normally, at least in the drug wars, for example, in Colombia, very clear example where drug lords actually would helped massively with massive amounts of money, helped a lot of people. That doesn't make them nice guys, but a lot of that money was given to improve government services that the government itself was not providing. So I don't have an answer to that question. I don't know why they attacked these students. Is it just because of missed communications? I don't know, but it's very strange.
Joan Grillo, why? Why were they killed?
Well, I was doing reporting there in Iguala and in the area, and I've been reporting on this issue for over 10 years. And I think it might seem at first inexplicable, but really I think it's part of something quite systematic, which has been happening in Mexico. It connects with what John Ackerman was saying. I agree there's been a kind of feudalization of Mexico, but I look more about how drug cartels have become like authorities in these places. They, you can call this state capture. I talked to one of these students who had a better name for it, really, narcopolitica or narco politics.
But why are students here a threat?
So what happens, I think, is when you have a drug cartel running effectively a town, controlling the mayor, controlling the police, then they react to what could be a minor public order offense in the way that they understand, and that is through mass murder. So there begins to be a public order incident of some students. They arrive at this town, they commandeer some buses, which they often do. Is a largely tolerated process. They take buses to their protests. And this, the town, because it's run by drug traffickers, react to this extremely violently, start shooting at them, it escalates, and then they react as if they're fighting rival drug traffickers. They dump a body of the student on the street. And I don't know if some of you have seen the photos, really horrific. They took away his skin, gouged his eyes out, and react in the same way as they do with rival traffickers. And that's the way they see any kind of threat to their territory or their control.
And the people who did the killing, is it the police or is it the gangs? We know that there's been 2 gang members who've been arrested.
It's a mix of the two. The problem is with these kind of cities and some of these states is you really get a police drug cartel complex, so that you have members of police here, and it's quite hard to understand sometimes from the outside. They're not simply hired to turn a blind eye on drug traffickers. They're full-on kidnappers, murderers. You get police commanders who later confess to decapitating victims. So you got in this place like this, you get a mix of uniformed policemen and ununiformed drug cartel hitmen attacking the students, kidnapping the students, and then doing these kind of things.
John Ackerman?
There's something important here that I was just reading yesterday about the family and the students. Maybe Johan can confirm this to us. But apparently there's a military garrison about 5 kilometers from Iguala. This would be absolutely normal because Guerrero in general is a conflictive state, and the military is already, it's not like Peña Nieto just decided to send it now. They're already there, but Guerrero is already kind of an occupied state. There were 3 shootings, or at least 2.5. There was one earlier around 8 or 9. Johan probably has the hours more specifically. And then there was another one about 2.5, 3 hours later, and then a third one around 2 in the morning. The military, as far as I understood, arrived around 1 or 2 in the morning, basically did nothing. I mean, we can't let this pass away as just a case of local craziness, backwards politics up in the hinterlands of Guerrero. No, this is the result of a systematic breakdown of the rule of law and corruption in Mexico as such. And, the president saying he's going to get to the bottom of it. I don't want to say nobody, but most people, these people who were protesting in the streets yesterday, don't take him on his word, man. This is something they want to see happen. The fact that it's taken 6 days to at least 6 days, and they don't even have the DNA. This happened almost 2 weeks ago, and we don't even have evidence on who committed it or the motives. We're wondering about this now. This is just it's a small town and a tragic incident, but it means a lot more in terms of what's happening in Mexico today.
Let's get confirmation from Johan. Is there a garrison right next to the city? I know that 48 hours ago, the federal forces moved in and took over the case.
Yeah, exactly right. John's exactly right. As soon as you drive into Iguala, there's a massive military base there. It was established there in the 1970s when the area was known as a hotbed of a guerrilla movement in that time, known as the Party of the Poor, by a guerrilla called Lucio Cabañas. And since then, they established a certain military occupation. It is a very good question. Why did the military not respond to this earlier? And what's the story there? And John is right. It was a whole series of shootings. This began around 9 o'clock at night. There was a first wave of shooting. There was even a pause in the shooting when one student was dead on the ground. Some journalists arrived, and the students began to give some statements to the press. And even while that was happening, then another wave of shooting with police and ununiformed gunmen happened. And the press who were there had to flee. So a really crazy series of events, and also, which hasn't been publicized as much among all this madness, a bus full of football players, soccer players, were driving out of town as well, were suddenly fired on by police, and members of the soccer team were killed. So absolutely crazy stuff happening, and the military did not intervene to stop this. And just a last point, as John said, This is not one small town. This is a major problem. We've got towns, cities, and state governments which are extremely corrupted by drug traffickers.
Gaspar Estrada, the Guerrero state that you know, it sounds you visited there. Is it this wild place that Johan's describing?
Yes, and it has been for years like that. But now we have this issue and this massacre that shows us, to not only for us but to the world, that Guerrero is facing huge problems. There's an institutional breakdown, an institutional collapse, also due to this fragmentation, because when the authoritarian regime ruled Mexico, it was very easy for the political authorities to control those gangs, to control those drug lords. But today, with this fragmentation, when you have on the one side you have the authorities, the elected officials that are linked with the crime, we have also the uprise of the drug lords, and you have also those social movements that are on the other side, and they're fighting, and there's no rule of law. So in that way, it's very hard for the authorities, legal established authorities, to settle down and to make that the law could prevail.
It explained why those soldiers stayed at barracks, Eduardo Cuey.
Well, Guerrero has always been, I believe, the most violent state in Mexico. This is nothing new. This has been going on for decades. Now, with the drug traffic, of course, it's much more so because there's so much more money involved. The key issue here, it seems to me, is simply corruption. These policemen get 100 times, 200 times more money from the drug traffickers than they ever would from their job as policemen from the government. So obviously that's what they do. But it's interesting. I saw the tweet that said that the soldiers are being sent in because the police are not doing their job. I don't know if you remember in the late 1990s when the Mexican government appointed a general as head of the anti-drug trafficking. I was in Washington at the time. I went to that press conference, and the head of the American anti-drug effort was very proud, came out with this general who had led American authorities to capture some heads of some cartels. And it was later revealed that, yes, of course, he had led American authorities to capture some heads of some cartels because he was working for an opposing cartel. So the corruption is everywhere. It permeates everything, the police, the military, and the political class.
All right, when we come back, we're going to pick up on this point. We're also going to ask our panel what will happen eventually to the missing mayor and chief of police of that town. Stay with us.